When it comes to a show, a series, or a feature film, how does one, whether it's you or someone who comes to you, prepare and pitch that? Welcome back to Making Imagination, the podcast that looks at animated filmmaking one craft at a time. I'm Wes, your host. Today, I had the privilege of sitting down with Carl Reed, one of the producers of the Oscar-winning animated short, Hair Love, from Sony Pictures Animation. Additionally, he's the co-founder and executive producer at Lionforge Animation, which, if you're from the Midwest, is pretty exciting news. They're just downtown St. Louis. I first met Carl probably sometime in 2011 when I believe he was working in comic book publishing. Our paths have crossed once or twice since then, but I'm grateful he took the time to talk with me today. Today we're going to talk about producing animation and some of what that means. I hope that if you're unfamiliar with the role, that you'll come away from this conversation with a little bit firmer grasp. And if this is your career path, with a little nugget to help you along. But don't take my word for it, here's my conversation with Carl Reed. So the role of producer can be difficult to describe because it can mean a whole lot of different kinds of things. So are there kind of essential ingredients that makes a producer? Like how might you define producer in animation?
I always see the producer as the person that is accountable when things go wrong. So bunch of different types of producers, but ultimately it boils down to schedule, budget, scope, creative. They have a view of the entire production, and really it's on their shoulders to make sure that it turns out the way that either the buyer or the production company or whoever those stakeholders are wanted it to.
That makes sense. That's a reasonable answer. In animation, can you just briefly kind of touch on some of the different kinds of producers you might encounter?
Yeah, so in every production, there might be slightly different names, but you'll see a producer, which in animated film is like the folks who are running the show. While in TV, you'll see executive producer. Sometimes executive producer could be the creator, the showrunner. It could be a financial role. It could be either way, it's at the genesis of the project. There's production coordinators who are more tactical and making sure that the trains stay on the tracks. You have production managers who are day-to-day with the production team, from the animators to the writers to everything. You have production assistants who are building their production chops and may focus on making the producers of the different categories' lives easier. You have line producers, which they have to maintain the budget and the specifics of the project. So if something is supposed to be 3 minutes and it's coming in 4 minutes, we have a big problem, and it's on the producer's head.
Okay.
Even though they aren't the ones that actually do all of the problems.
Yeah.
They're the ones that ultimately have to fix
it. Nice. So for you specifically, I know you started out with Lionforge as a comics when it was, well, specifically in the graphic novel industry, and then So
way back in the day, in the 90s, I started out as a comic artist, and then as I kind of had to continue eating as a human, I realized that comics don't pay as well as they could in some cases, and so I expanded my skill set to and then with a couple of friends in St. Louis opened up a agency called Mach 1, and then we later wound up merging with another agency to form the Ego Agency, which was we did commercials, animated commercials, we did websites, we did illustration, design, comics, anything and everything that would build that we could do for clients. And then later I moved out to LA to get some actual broadcast animation under my belt. And so did that for some years. And then when we came back, helped co-found Lionforge Comics and then later Lionforge Animation.
Just curious, what was the what kind of experience were you getting out in LA?
So when I went out there, I was like super intimidated. I'm like, we'd done commercials,
Yeah.
things like that, but and maybe music videos and little things. But I'm like just looking at all of the greats and just looking at Chuck Jones and like all of these great animators and like, okay, I'm gonna, get in there and totally be out of my depth. And then the production realities are completely different. No one really has it all figured out. And
Uh-huh.
so you dive in and you take on as many hats as possible. When I started, I was doing, you know, everything from character design to animated scenes to background painting to storyboards to uh, at the company I worked at, they did some game development and things like that. So I would do some games and uh, just anything I could get my hands on, which really helped kind of get a sense of the whole lay of the land. We were literally every part of the pipeline you got to touch.
So when it comes to producing, either large scale, small scale, whether developing an idea or finding an idea, what's something that you, as a producer, think you find promising when you see a concept or hear a concept or conceive of a concept? What strikes you as something that's worth nurturing?
You know, I think I like to be surprised by the content. So everything has an air of familiarity and is based on all of the inputs that we all have. We've all seen certain movies and it's inspired us and read certain books. But, I feel like if we're able to find content that surprises you, uh, then I think it's extra special in that while it may not be 100% there at the acquisition stage, it's worth putting the time in because, uh, I feel like people respond to new and different stuff and they don't want to see the same old thing.
Now, in terms of finding one, um, specifically Hair Love. You discover that project, you nurture it, see it to the finish line, and even to the Academy Awards, which is pretty awesome. Can you walk us through what that process was like?
It was really it was the brainchild of Matthew Cherry, and he had this idea and went on to do a Kickstarter to he wanted to visualize his idea as a book and as an animated short. So the Kickstarter kind of took off. We were actually exposed to it, I think, right during that time. One of our team members, Jimmy Thomas, introduced us to the project, and and also Vine Gill, and we were like, oh, it's amazing. It kind of represents exactly what we're trying to do. And as a company, we had just started Line Forge Animation, and we didn't want to announce to the world that another empty announcement in Variety or another byline in a magazine that says this company is there. So we want to kind of show and prove what we're about, the type of content that we want to produce. And so Hair Love was checked every single box from a concept perspective. And also it was at a phase where we could add value to it. It was an immediate yes, right? And then we got to spend some great time with at the time it was Matthew, Monica, and Karen, and the other producers, and it just was uh, it just had to be done. Just had to be done. Period. And I mean, I guess everyone agreed with this. So
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned, kind of checking boxes and things that were in line with the mission that you guys were after. And your guys' mission at Line Forge Animation is to create content that challenges expectations and reflects the diversity of your audience. As a producer, do you find that you have to sort of be a steward of that mission, or do you find that everyone who comes to you and you work with is already kind of on board with that mission and coming to you because of that mission.
Well, personally, and I think each producer is different. Like a company should kind of make sure that everything is moving toward that mission. But the reason you bring on producers is because they all have a different perspective. And I think it helps that mission, our mission specifically. But I'm totally mission driven and I want to see new positive things out there, even if the content is negative, if the impact is positive. When I say negative content, you can have The Godfather, right? People are getting their heads blown off. But if the impact is positive, the ends justify the means in my eyes. So I think that's what drives me to good content. I want to take something from the content when I read it, or when I read a script, or when I hear an idea. What am I going to take from this, and what am I putting out there? Because far too much. I think there's a lot of voices that determine what is on TV and what's on film, and I'd be remiss if I didn't contribute something positive to that, right? And just let everybody else build the world. Because you look back a decade ago and you'll see the foundation of where we are right now. Everything that's going on socially, politically, was all set by the TV shows and the movies that we watched 10 years ago. And 10 years before that, you'll see the same thing. So it's not a coincidence. When you see, if you go back to the 90s and say, hey, we should have a Black president, they'll be like, oh, whatever. You'll never get someone in Iowa to vote for a Black president. And then you have 24 and Fifth Element and all of these things that show a Black president, and the world didn't explode. So I think those things directly led up to it. So, I'm a fan of like Rudyard Kipling and these sci-fi authors and such as well, that basically wrote all of our technology in their books and imagined the future. And we're here and we live in the Jetsons. And so we have Roombas running around now and we're talking over the internet. And so I want to do a little bit of that. I'd love to be a part of envisioning what tomorrow is.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Jetsons, because like one of their things was these video screens, video calls, which is exactly what we're doing.
Look at the iPads, you can see them on Star Trek.
Oh yeah. So Hair Love, as I said, it was a short film you guys produced. Goes all the way to the Oscars, which is amazing, especially having started from Kickstarter. But it goes even further than that. Now it's in production to be a series. Is that right? Can you talk about scaling up from a short film to a sustainable animated series, and kind of what that entails from the producer point of view?
Fortunately, we didn't have to do it in a bubble. We had Sony Pictures Animation in the mix, and they really they already have a strong framework to produce all of the great things they produce, right? So we just kind of fell into the system. But as you think about what is important in a short film, when you're creating a short film, you're trying to make, and it's not an easy medium. It's just as hard as creating a full length, if just as hard as creating a show. It's just different realities. You have to fit so much into one small box and have it be clear and communicate an idea and avoid all the hurdles. But when you think about how you translate a short film or even a comic or something from any other medium into a show or into a film, you really have to just boil it down to what is important and what did I want to take out, what did I want to put out there with this content, and how do I take this forward for 150 episodes instead of 3 minutes. And so as long as you keep that, because you'll notice sometimes later in the season of some shows, or later in the later seasons of some shows, you'll see them jump the shark a bit and just add fresh young kid with his hat turned backwards, and now that's gonna, that's gonna save the show. But that's not what the show is about, right? So just keeping your eye on the prize and focusing on, hey, you know what? It's this family. We loved their interaction through this difficult time. Let's see them in other times and through other situations.
Yeah. Is there, I suppose this kind of comes down to your story core, or does it? But is there something when you're conceiving of, this, we're expanding this out, do you have to conceive of an end, or do you figure out something that will give it sort of repeatable life without necessarily having an end? Does that make sense?
It really depends on what you're creating. Okay. If you're making Game of Thrones, it may be helpful to have an end. Sometimes, some writers are seat of their pants writers where they're like, I'm going to define these characters, take them through a journey, and let the characters kind of define that end. I know generally where we want to go, but let's be on that ride alongside the viewers and hopefully keep that energy. But other times you want to understand, hey, they were dead the entire time. And so I need to put all of these red doorknobs. And in that case, you want to make sure that you know the end, especially, you look like a genius throughout the whole thing. But and then there's times where you're setting up something episodic and you want it to, you don't want necessarily growth on an individual episode as much as maybe season, you might have some growth season by season. But you want to be able to do 200 episodes. You want to do 500 episodes. And in that case, you want it to be more open-ended, but still never losing sight of the whole point of the show. So you might say, okay, let me really define these characters in this world, in this scenario, and have a really strong story engine as to what is the conflict every episode and how are we bringing the characters in and testing how crazy they are or their interactions with one another.
You mentioned Chuck Jones earlier, just as kind of being one of the, he's obviously one of the greats. Are there series out there that you kind of look to as like, man, that is a fantastic show. They did everything right.
Oh yeah.
Right now, what are some of those?
Right now, I'd say one of my faves that just, first season recently ended, so it's nothing to watch right now, but Ranking of Kings, Usama Ranking. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like an anime series, and it stars a kid who's mute. And he was born kind of a little different. He comes from a father who's this great king, and he's a giant, and he's this he's massive, and he had this little runt of a kid who's mute, and but he goes on this epic journey to become king. Oh, it's amazing, and they surprise you episode by episode. They connect all of the story points, so it had to be thought out in advance, or I don't know how you would do it if it wasn't, something to really inspire you to do better and create even better content. Now, it's an action kind of dramatic show, a lot of politics and who's going to be the king and who's going to rule and things like that. But at the same time, it's an adventure starring this young kid and his best friend, and it's about friendship. So, a really strong show, and I was thrilled every second of the way and looking forward to next episodes. Some other content that's recently surprised me that I really couldn't stop watching. Really enjoyed The Mandalorian. I think it was like enough of a throwback to things that we've seen before while introducing whole new elements and, great acting, beautiful scenery and, world building. Rise up, sing out. I hate to toot our own horn.
Create a world. Create a world. Colorful world. Colorful world. Together we can create such a wonderful world.
Series of musical shorts that, really touch on some totally different topics than you'll see in any other kids show. So yeah, that's a few. I think there's so much good content nowadays that, you know, uh, hopefully, we stay on a roll.
Yeah, and that's kind of a great thing, that when there is more good content, you kind of have to level up just to even and in terms of producing animation, there are often in credits of any series or film multiple production companies involved, and you've even mentioned with Hair Love, you've working with Sony Pictures Animation. So how are sort of roles kind of divvied out amongst the producers of the different production companies? Do you guys kind of meet up beforehand and kind of figure out who's handling what, or or is it just kind of co-collaboration, kind of keeping each other accountable? Like, how does working with other producers of other production companies on the same production play out?
Sometimes it can be confusing because there's different kind of producer arrangements and production company arrangements, like from a creation and like IP level, where this is the show and we're collaborating on what the show or what the film is. That can be several production companies coming in with that initial creative, right? And shaping what that is. But then you have the actual physical production of what the film or the show is. And you might have additional production companies that come in and just do one part. They might just be doing visual effects, or they might be doing, the animation or the visual development or certain things like that. Sometimes, we'll do it all in house. So different productions call for kind of a different setup. I think ultimately it goes back to, we want to produce content that crosses the finish line eventually.
Yeah.
And so there's production realities that would kind of dictate that if you can justify pulling an entire production together internally with your production team, if you need to bring on some other teams who may have either maybe better at some particular part of the production or more equipped to handle it at a certain budget level, or has some unique technology or tools or something. It's just how to best serve the production. And I think that should be the number one goal of the producers, and is typically how the production setup is configured.
When it comes to a show, a series, or a feature film, how does one, whether it's you or someone who comes to you, prepare and pitch that? Is there a series Bible often, or how does that often play out?
There's not one way either. You always hear the fantastic stories about someone having a napkin or bumping into someone in the elevator and saying, "Got a show, have a film," and that's a lot more rare. You'll hear a lot about a popular book or a popular video game getting a chance to kind of test other mediums and do a film or a TV series, and you see that a lot more frequently, where something has some traction in another area and you can convince a buyer, hey, it's not so risky. They're bringing around their whole tribe. And then you have original concepts, which is much harder. And, the napkin story is an anomaly. So you have to really transfer that emotion and what made you excited about that project. And some of the ways that you do that is through, very brief one sheet, very brief teaser or sizzle reel that shows very quickly what the concept is about. And I think that's most important because everyone's busy. And sometimes you need to do that before you even get a meeting to pitch, because you have to get them excited to hear your idea. And then once you do get a chance for a longer pitch, you want to be as succinct as possible and transfer over that story, why you should do this, why now, why the team is involved, and why it would be a benefit for the broadcaster or streamer or even financier to be a part of it. And all of that has to be communicated all at once in a very short time, from 15 minutes to 30 minutes. So oftentimes you'll have a short video, 30 seconds or so. You don't want to spend all the time on that. You might a couple minutes at most. You might have a longer piece that you'll leave them with to look at on their own time. You might have a pitch deck that you're going through on the call or on the call nowadays, but on the pitch. And then you might have a longer, more fleshed out pitch Bible that you're leaving behind that they can go answer a lot of their questions. But that's just only the start, because inevitably there'll be additional questions that arise, and there'll be some things that the broadcaster or streamer have thought about that you haven't, and some considerations that may impact them and their priorities. And so they'll come back with questions and how you'd address this, and maybe even some suggestions on how to make it better. And those are the ones that I like to hear, because it shows that you did your job with communicating the concept and that there's some interest there. And B, it shows that it might be a great partner because they're already kind of adding value to the project even before it was picked up. Long story short, there's a lot of different ways to approach a pitch, but the ultimate goal, every item that you make, even back in the day, some people would make maquettes of the characters so you can see them in three dimensions and truly understand what they are. Maybe some mock products so you can see, hey, this has some marketability. There's a lot of things you can do, but it needs to transfer why this is a benefit to the broadcaster or streamer, what the story is, that there is an audience out there that can benefit the partner.
In some ways, it's encouraging to hear that there can be so many different ways to make a successful pitch. Kind of in the reverse direction, are there really kind of bad ways to make a pitch, or poor ways, something that, someone brings to you that's just an immediate red flag? No, I'm pass.
Whether for bad or good, some things are hard to understand. If you can't understand it, how can you get behind it? So it's all about communicating that idea. And if it's not communicated, it may be the best thing ever. You're like, look, this cures cancer, trust me. And it's like, you didn't just outright say it cures cancer. You're like, oh, it touches, you got to go to the molecular level and it does this. And they're like, what does it actually do? So, sometimes you can have a really long pitch and at the end be just as confused or just as clueless as you were in the beginning. And so I would say that's the worst. Additionally, kind of taking some cues from the room. And sometimes it's just not a good time for their buyer, or it's not something that they're interested in. And so if the pitch isn't, so it's not good to really draw it out, because then they may not want to hear another pitch from you. Yeah. So, you got to be as succinct as possible and as clear with the concept, and hopefully keep the energy level up in the room. You realize that they might be seeing 10 of these things and dozens of these things. And so whatever you can do to get people excited, take them on a ride and give them an experience for the pitch, I feel it could have additional influence. And I feel like some of the best ones that I've been a part of have had an experiential component where you feel a part of the show, a part of the project.
Huh. Interesting. That makes me kind of think, I was watching a clip from Will Smith, actually, on his YouTube channel. He talked about why he turned down The Matrix, the role of Neo. And he said it was the pitch. He said when the Wachowskis pitched it to him, he was like, I don't know about this. And then, of course, just trying to be a bad pitch.
We do face a challenge that, new content that isn't as seasoned, or as it doesn't have as much traction, even if it was a book or a toy or whatever it came from, a game, you still have to travel that uphill road to convince the buyer that, hey, people want this and it's really good. And they're like, everything everyone shows is so good and they love it. So how can we tell what's good? So we just have to convince them that, yes, 50 million people bought this book. That alone is why you want it. But also, it's a good book and it fits your network this way. And, it has this unique audience that you want. So, we still have an uphill battle every project. And also, we want to make sure that content grows, our content library grows. So we take content from everywhere.
Okay. And I think you guys were fortunate in that very early on, you did win an Academy Award with Hair Love. Does that prove advantageous when it comes to selling ideas or acquiring ideas, or was that just kind of a fortuitous start and it's still kind of an uphill climb?
As I mentioned, our goal was we want to put out a piece of content that represents who we are as a company. And that's 100% the determining factor of why we got involved in Hair Love and why that became our first production to be released. And we never expected it to go the distance that it did. And I would be lying if I said it wasn't the best calling card that you could possibly have, right? I do think that there are the same challenges that every other production company faces, that we still have to travel. I do think that when we knock on certain doors, though, people are more open. People who are more likely to open and at least approach the conversation, especially, feel like it was executed well. So a lot of times that's important.
Yeah. Another animated project to which you were attached, Rhymes Through the Times. This features many established, well-known loved characters: Blue from Blue's Clues, Dora, Peppa Pig.
Oh yes, I'm gonna always do my best. I'm gonna use my talent, change the world, never settle for less.
How does this kind of project come about? And is there any kind of red tape with licensing all these different kinds of characters?
Well, so we couldn't have done that ourselves. It would be impossible. As much as I want to do Blue's Clues and Blaze and the Monster Machines and Peppa Pig and put them all on stage and do a preschool version of Hamilton for Black History, as great as idea that is, the folks at Nick Jr. and Noggin had to be the ones to kind of be critical to that, because they have access to all of those powerful IP, right? And so we were fortunate enough to be invited onto the project.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's one of those things that, like, man, how does this happen? Because that's a lot of
Exactly.
Which leads me to my next question. As a producer, is there kind of red tape that you do have to occasionally learn how to navigate around or cut through, or how do you kind of do that?
Every second of every day. We are scissors, and all we do is cut red tape. That's the producer's job. Like, from, every production has a fixed budget. Every creator wants to create the Taj Mahal.
Yeah,
and you can't do that on a fixed budget. So there's red tape there. Even from a broadcaster and a creator and a director and an artist all have different goals. And how does that become aligned to serve the ultimate purpose of the show? How do you keep all of these varying opposing forces working together? I think that is the biggest challenge of any production, and it's not something that can be fixed as much as it can be navigated. And so that's the biggest red tape. Also, with new ideas, and everyone lauds and gives great applause and respect to things that change, that break the mold, right, and things that are different. But no one wants to take a chance on it. So afterwards, you see things 2020. But before, it's really difficult when you're trying to do something new, and when you say, hey, look, not only are we doing something new, but we showed you that people want to see this type of content. We've proven it. And they're like, yeah, but do more people want to see it?
Wow.
Yes, I guess is the short answer, but we have to show you and we have to prove it. And so there's that red tape with anything new. I can, anything new it's a little bit risky. And so I can understand, folks who have a job on the line taking safer bets. But with that said, hopefully you can stack the deck enough, whether it's this content is just insane, it's timely, it has the right team behind it, you can clearly see the viewing audience, and it happens to be at a time when the buyer, whether it's a streamer or a broadcaster, that it fits their priorities because they are thinking, what is going to come on next fall? What's coming on 2 years from now? And here's what our mandate is. And you don't know what it is, but what you're pitching us has to fit within that. So all of those stars have to align for a project to connect. And so that's why there'll be 10 projects being pitched out and one might make it, or, there's several projects that we get involved in are so great and never see they never see a green light. And it's a shame, but it's the unfortunate reality.
Yeah. Wow. Are you privy to network mandates? Do you guys receive regular, here's Netflix's current mandates and so forth?
It's just really a conversation thing. Like there's development execs and buyers and different folks that you just really have to be one of those folks ringing the doorbells and saying, hey, how can I help you? What things are you looking for? And as we're trying to figure out what we want to produce, we want to make sure that they're aligning with the things that you want to distribute and publish. So it's just a constant conversation, and it has to be constant because, especially nowadays, in the old days, it was more when linear was big, you had a longer feedback loop. And now feedback is instant. People have reactions online that determine broadcast priorities. Sometimes some unforeseen social event changes what the priorities of a broadcaster is next year. And who can predict COVID? And you have a show that, doesn't really apply anymore because of this crazy event, or now that a global pandemic has happened and everyone's indoors, how are the broadcasters and streamers going to react to that? What content do they want to show as a reaction to that? Do we want to show more shows where it's actually taking place in the pandemic, right? Or not? Do we think that by the time those are made, the pandemic will be over and nobody will be able to relate to? Or will there be too many of them and people will get tired of it? So, it's kind of like, have you ever been to a carnival and had to throw a ring around the neck of a soda bottle?
Oh, yeah.
That's what it's like. And that it's some kind of trick to it. And you always think you have the trick. Sometimes you may be right. Most of the time you're not. But you got to keep throwing those rings.
You sort of alluded to this in one way or another already, but what are some of the things that might set a seasoned producer apart from someone who's just starting out?
No production is a trivial thing. And so there is going to be a challenge from the first day to the last day of the production. There's going to be some sort of challenge. And the more experienced the producer is, especially at what they're doing. Because like I said, now, what is an experienced producer when Unreal Engine 5 comes out and now everyone has to use that and no one used it before because it didn't come out? So an experienced producer, but the more you're able to be prepared to handle these problems and ensure that you hit the finish line and that millions of dollars and months and months of people's lives, and hundreds of people who are a part of this aren't doing it all for nothing. It's a little bag to carry, a little bit of a burden on your shoulders. But the more you're equipped to make sure that happens, the better and the more likely other people will be willing to put their faith in you as a producer and your ability to cross that finish line. Now, it will be a battle no matter how experienced you are. Again, I mentioned those opposing forces. People also have different views of every single thing. So you often have to, as a team player also, you have to say, hey, I know from experience that this is going to happen. This is what always happens. But everyone else doesn't see it that way. Let's at least put a system in place to where if this starts to happen, if we see this sign, then we'll do it my way. So, you can win eventually, and hopefully you don't win and everything goes well in somebody else's way. But, there are some fail safes that you can put in place, even if there's some disagreements or, the team wants to go in a different direction, or, a broadcaster wants to go in a different direction. There are some things, but then there's also times where you have to stand by your guns and say, look, this is compromising the integrity of the production. This is compromising the whole point of doing this. This is compromising what my company does. This is compromising who I am as a producer and what I stand for. So when it's that deep, then it's screeching halt. You have to address it.
Yeah. I guess my experience with Coolfire and just like the live action world was that it's incredibly hard to get anything made, which in some ways is kind of discouraging. But I guess it's true in animation too. Like, it's just hard to get stuff made. Makes you kind of appreciate some of those Oscar speeches where they say that, oh, this was so and so many years and so got it to the finish line.
It makes you really appreciate the YouTubers and folks that are able to put out a short film, and people that are able to get their labor of love over the finish line, because you can criticize everything and nothing is perfect, but it's done. That's job one. If you can put something out and release it, that is more important than anything. And even on the comic side, back as a comic artist, the key is getting a finished page. You can noodle it, you can fix things forever. Finish. And then you can do the next thing better. You look at it and you say, okay, I need to do that better next time. But it's finished and it's out, and yes, people will criticize it, but they would criticize it anyway. They're going to criticize it anyway. But it's done, so they can at least criticize it.
Last question, as we kind of wind down the time here. You guys, one of another unique things that you guys have is that you are in the Midwest. You're not on either coast. Can you talk about what that's like, both advantages and disadvantages, and even just what that does for your company culture, if anything?
I feel like that there is a little bit of a bubble that you can get in when you're too close to the scene, if that makes sense. So the advantages of being located on the coast are that you can set a meeting at Disney and walk in today, tomorrow, a week from now, without flying halfway around the country, right? You could go have lunch with a development executive, on a Thursday because you just happen to be nearby. So you miss out on that. But what you do gain is a real sense of like flyover country, and a real sense of what the majority of the country experiences and sees on the different perspectives, which to me leads to fresher content, to me, which leads to a heads up on new trends that may not be as apparent when folks are looking at media cycles and things. When you look at people and you see they're doing something different from a different place, then you're able to kind of sometimes get a jump on things. Also, things don't cost what they cost on the coast. So, you're able to take a few more risks that you may not be able to take in LA or New York. A huge detriment is you don't have the access to the experienced labor pools and talent. If you're a really great actor or if you're a really great writer, you're more than likely going to move to the coast. So one challenge is building enough of an industry infrastructure so that people can remain in these places. I think now it's better and better. And again, it's another alignment of the stars with distributed workforces and globalization and folks being able to work in a job from Bangladesh and the head office is in Boise. We can do the same thing. And the pandemic really proved that is not only viable, that it's the way business will be done going forward.
Any final words for the aspiring producer or someone who wants to get into animation?
I will just say, get something done, and you won't love it. You won't like it. Get it done and put it out there, and people will criticize it. And you need to welcome those people to criticize it, because they become your worst critics and then your best friends and your biggest evangelists. And, if you, going back into comics, if you talk to a comic fan and they love what they love, but it's not without criticism. And I think that criticism makes it stronger and everyone grows because of that. But again, you have to finish and you have to release, and you don't have to wait for people to give you permission in 2022, which is great. You just may have to scale your ambition down and prove out a small part, gain an audience and things like that, so that you can execute more of your vision. But finish, release more and more projects that are independently created and released, the more that the big boys will realize, we need to be on our toes and we need to embrace different perspectives and different points of contact.